Okay, I mentioned in the end of the last video, I wanted to talk about organic molecules really quickly, or biological molecules, if you will. And so I'm going to cover these pretty quick. In this lecture, I've got pictures of the atomic structure of these things. Don't really care so much about that, but it is still important to know what an organic molecule is and what it's made of, and those pictures will help reinforce that. So, organic molecules. This is any compound that contains carbon and hydrogen. Which compounds are these, or what is included in organic molecules? Well, there are carbohydrates, lipids, or fats and oils, proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's work our way through these organic molecules real quick. So carbohydrates. Most people, when they hear carbohydrates, they think of bread and pasta and things like that. Well, those are carbohydrates, but carbohydrates are in a lot of other things as well. They typically have this sort of ring-like structure. The simplest form of them, anyway, has this structure. That's what we call a monomer, or a simple carbohydrate, or monosaccharide even. Once you start stringing these structures together, you get long chains of carbohydrates, and we call these complex carbohydrates, or polysaccharides. Starches in potatoes. That is a carbohydrate. It's a branched carbohydrate of glucose stuck together. That's also the same thing that is in corn and wheat grains. The same starch is there. In humans, we store carbohydrates as glycogen. It's almost identical in structure, just a different branching pattern. But there's also other types of carbohydrates as well that aren't just for short-term energy, which is what glucose and starch is for. We also use carbohydrates as structural components. So in plants, they have what's called a cell wall. A cell wall is made of cellulose. Cellulose is a polymer, multiple units of glucose stuck together and cross-linked so that it makes this strong molecule that helps provide structure to a plant cell. There's also other structural carbohydrates. Arthropods, for example. A lot of arthropods use chitin as a structural carbohydrate on their exoskeleton. Lipids are next. So lipids are fats and oils. Some lipids are composed of a glycerol molecule here stuck to 3 fatty acid chains. So this is glycerol, this is a fatty acid. When you stick those together, you get what's called a triglyceride. And most of the time, triglycerides are there for long-term energy storage. It's a big function of lipids. But we also use lipids in our cell membranes. In fact, your cell membrane is composed of mostly fatty acids. It's called a phospholipid. It's got 2 fatty acid tails, so 2 of these things here, and a phosphate head on the top. So our plasma membranes, our cell membranes, every single one of them is composed of those phospholipids. So those are extremely important. It actually helps make the cell membrane slightly liquid so that it can change shape and move with pressure and such things like that. Proteins is the next biological molecule. Proteins are made up of building blocks called amino acids. So you may have noticed that I kind of skipped over the building block of fats in the last one. And that's because they really don't have a monomer and polymer like we talked about with sugars. But proteins do. The monomer of a protein is an amino acid. And there are 20 different amino acids that all life on Earth uses to build proteins. So you string together a bunch of amino acids, and those amino acids on that chain are going to interact with each other, with their neighbors, and with amino acids further down the chain. And that causes these chains of amino acids to bend and fold and form distinct shapes. The shape of that molecule determines the function of that molecule. And proteins do a lot of different things. in living organisms. So this is the basic structure of an amino acid. We have an amino group, that's why it gets its name. We have a carboxyl group, COOH, you'll often see that written like that, COO, and a side chain. And this is where the amino acids differ, this R group. And so here's a little table of all the different amino acids that are used to build proteins in living things. And you can see that they all have this amino group, H2N or NH2, and the COOH or the carboxyl group. They all differ on that third functional R group. When you string a bunch of amino acids together, you form what's called a polypeptide. That's the polymer of a protein. A folded functional polypeptide, that's when we get a functional protein. So what are these functions that I talked about for proteins? Well, there's all kinds of transport, for example. And hemoglobin is a great example of a transport protein. It transports oxygen from our lungs to the tissues in our body, and that's actually what we're looking at here, is a hemoglobin molecule. Defense, antibodies. Your immune system relies on proteins called antibodies to identify and remove pathogens. Regulation. So regulation of body systems and blood sugar in this case, whereas what insulin does. So insulin helps regulate blood sugar. It's a hormone. It's a chemical signal. Motion. So myosin and actin are two proteins that are in our muscles that help literally move our bodies around, but there's also myosin and actin and a few others like tropomyosin and dynan and other proteins that have functions within an individual cell. Support, collagen. Collagen is a protein that's in our skin. It helps give our skin resilience. It helps hold its shape. Without that collagen, our skin begins to get wrinkled and sagging. So when you get older, that collagen begins to break down, and that's why old people have wrinkles. Metabolism. This is huge. Metabolism is all the reactions, chemical reactions occurring inside of your body. And most of those chemical reactions rely on a protein called an enzyme that catalyzes or speeds up that reaction. So proteins are super, super important. Finally, we have nucleic acids, and nucleic acids are information carriers. Specifically, they carry the information on how to build proteins. So you've probably seen a sequence of letters like this, T, A, C, and G. A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G, so on and so forth. This sequence codes for a sequence of amino acids, right? And so those amino acids will be strung together, and the sequence is dictated by this nucleic acid, DNA in this case, and that will then fold into a functional protein. So nucleic acids store all the information for how to build all the proteins in your body.